The word cynic is one of the worst thefts in the history of language. Someone stole a word that meant radical freedom and made it mean bitterness. A long time ago, a man threw away his cup, his cloak, his bowl, his shoes. He crawled inside a large clay jar in the middle of Athens, and he smiled. Not because he had lost his mind, because he had found it. That man was Diogenes, and he was not a pessimist. He was the first minimalist the world had ever seen. But here's what no one tells you. His project was not about doing without. It was about proving that everything you chase is a chain, and that chains only hold you if you believe they're locked. So what happened? How did a word built on joy, freedom, and plain living become a label for people who sneer at everything? And what did the original cynics know about stuff, status, and desire that we've somehow managed to forget? The answers start in a cluttered Greek market, with a man who owned nothing and feared no one. First, the branding problem. When someone calls you a cynic today, they mean you trust nothing and no one. You roll your eyes. You expect the worst. That meaning has been with us for so long that it feels like the truth. But it's not. It's a twist so deep that the original cynics would barely recognize it. The Greek word kynikos comes from kion, which means dog. It was a nickname, maybe an insult at first. Athenians called these thinkers dogs because they lived in public, slept on the ground, and ignored every rule of polite society. But the cynics wore the label with pride. Dogs, they said, know what matters. A dog eats when hungry, sleeps when tired, guards what it loves. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't perform. So the first gap opens up. Modern cynics distrust the world. Ancient cynics distrusted everything the world told them to want. There's a huge difference between those two stances. One is passive and sour. The other is active and fierce. The obvious reaction is to say these people were just oddballs. Hippies of the ancient world. Dropouts with a flair for drama. And it's not wrong to notice the drama. But that reading misses something key. The drama was the point. Every public act was a form of argument. Before Diogenes, there was his teacher, a man named Antisthenes, a student of Socrates, who drew one sharp lesson from his master's trial and death. Socrates had spent his life asking questions. Athens killed him for it. Antisthenes decided that ideas on their own were not enough. You had to live them. Philosophy was not something you thought. It was something you did with your body, your choices, your daily routine. So he pitched a modest tent in a grove of olive trees. He taught a small circle of students outside. He wore plain clothes. He put aside scrolls when the weather was good and walked barefoot instead. This was philosophy as practice. Not lecture, not debate. Just the slow, steady work of stripping away what wasn't needed. Diogenes took that seed and grew it into a show no one could ignore. Picture the agora in Athens. Vendors hawk bronze mirrors. Merchants brag about silk from the east. Citizens parade in dyed cloaks, silver buckles, polished sandals. Into this market walks a man with nothing. Not a bag, not a coin, not even a pair of shoes. He finds a large clay storage jar, the kind used for grain or wine, and he climbs inside. He doesn't hide in it. He sets it right in the middle of the crowd. And from that jar, he begins to talk. Ancient writers record that he shed item after item in public acts of giving things away. Each one was a statement. He tossed his oil flask. He dropped his only cloak. When he saw a child drinking water from cupped hands, he smashed his wooden cup. If a child doesn't need a cup, he said, then neither do I. This was not madness. It was a formula. And the formula worked like a seesaw. On one side, pile every object you own. On the other side, place your freedom. Each thing you drop raises your freedom higher. The less you need, the less anyone can threaten you with loss. The less you fear loss, the freer you become. But that raises a fair question. Isn't this just a stunt? Couldn't anyone sleep in a jar for a week and claim to be free? Here's the layer that most people miss. The cynics didn't just give up comfort. They gave up shame. And that was far harder. Diogenes did the most basic human things in public. Eating, sleeping, even going to the bathroom in the open square. These moments make modern readers wince. They were meant to. But not because Diogenes wanted to shock. He wanted to ask a question. Why is this shameful? Who decided it was shameful? A dog eats in public. A dog sleeps where it drops. These are natural acts. The shame is not in the body. The shame is in the rule. And the rule was invented by people who wanted control. This is where the cynics moved past simple minimalism into something deeper. They practiced what the Greeks called autarkia, complete self-rule. If you don't need approval, no one can steer you with praise. If you don't fear mockery, no one can steer you with shame. If you don't crave comfort, no one can bribe you. Strip all three away and you're left with a person that no force on earth can push around. And that's exactly where the most famous scene in all of Cynic thinking takes place. Alexander the Great, the young conqueror who had taken most of the known world, came to Corinth. He had heard about the strange man in the jar. Everyone had. So the most powerful human alive walked up to the most powerless human alive and made an offer. "Ask me for anything," Alexander said. "Anything at all. I can grant it." Diogenes looked up. He was sunbathing. His answer was calm, short, and crushing. "Yes," he said. "Could you step to the side? You're blocking my sunlight." Alexander's guards waited for their king to explode. Instead, he turned to them and said something striking. "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes. Think about what just happened. A man with nothing held the moral high ground over a man with everything, and the man with everything knew it. That moment is not a cute story. It's a proof of concept. The seesaw tipped. Freedom outweighed empire. But here's the nuance that keeps this from being a simple fairy tale. Not every cynic lived this way. Only about half of the thinkers ancient scholars label as cynics embraced the full extreme. Many others wore plain clothes but still had homes. Some gave away excess wealth but kept what they needed to teach. A few even took small gifts from wealthy backers. So the movement had a range. And that matters. Because it means the cynic challenge was never all or nothing. You didn't have to live in a jar to test the formula. You just had to ask, for each thing you own, does this serve me or do I serve it? Then there was the lamp, one of the most copied images in all of thinking about how to live. Diogenes walking through the market at high noon, holding a lit lantern, peering into the faces of every person he passed. "What are you doing?" people asked. "Looking for an honest person," he said. The lamp at noon works on two levels. First, it says that honesty is so rare you need a light to find it even when the sun is up. Second, it says that the crowd itself is in the dark. They're buying and selling and performing status. None of that is honest. The lantern doesn't find what it's looking for. That's the point. The search is the argument. Now, the skeptic in you might push back. This all sounds like a privilege. Only someone who could rely on public charity, mild weather, and the safety of a Greek city-state could afford to own nothing. Fair. And a thinker who sleeps in a jar is still sleeping in a city that has walls, guards, and grain supplies he didn't help build. That pushback has weight, but it doesn't undo the core insight. Even if the lifestyle was extreme, the question it asked is universal. How much of what you own actually makes you freer? And how much of it just makes you anxious about losing it? That question has echoed for thousands of years. It shaped the Stoics, who took the cynic idea of living by nature and built a full system of ethics around it. It shaped early Christian monks, who gave up their things and lived in desert caves. And it shows up today in ways the cynics would spot at once. The tiny home movement runs on the same logic. Fewer walls, less to clean, less to insure, less to worry about. The seesaw tilts and something lifts on the other side. Digital detox retreats have surged lately. People pay money to have their phones taken away. They pay for the feeling of owning less, even if only for a weekend. Diogenes would have laughed at the irony, but he also would have understood the hunger behind it. There's a limit, though. And being honest about limits is what splits real insight from a sales pitch. The cynic formula works best when the thing you're shedding is truly a burden. But not every item is a chain. A tool that lets you create. A book that feeds your mind. A shelter that keeps your family safe. These aren't distractions. They're foundations. The cynics themselves kept a staff for walking and a sack for food. Zero was never the real goal. The real goal was awareness. Knowing the difference between what holds you up and what weighs you down. So here's the reframe that changes everything. Cynicism was never about what you don't have. It was about what you don't need. Those are two very different ideas. One is lack. The other is power. If this changed how you think about the word cynic, or about the pile of things you call yours, I'd love to hear which part hit hardest. Drop it in the comments. And if you want more thinking that cuts through the noise, the channel goes deeper every week. 2,000 years later, the sun still shines on anyone willing to step out of the shadow. The question is the same one Diogenes asked Alexander. What exactly is standing in your light?